Now let's look at the business climate in Nigeria. 2025 has been projected a year of many opportunities in the business climate in Nigeria, ranging from agriculture to technology and other sectors. Now, Nigeria has been endorsed as the digital digital trade champion by the African Union. So what does this mean for technology, or let's just say the tech sector in Nigeria? We're going to begin from that techie part of the conversation. We have in the studio our guest, who is Sam Orovwudje, a policy and international affairs analyst. Good morning, sir. Welcome to the show.
My pleasure.
You said that I was just glowingly talking about the business climate in Nigeria, and then how 2025 has been projected to be a year of opportunities for Nigeria in agriculture and particularly in technology. Now Nigeria has been endorsed as the digital champion by the African Union to facilitate the AfCFTA digital trade protocol. If we look at Nigeria's digital economy, there are a number of jobs that could create for people. Now, what do you think are some of the issues happening within that sector that could bring about growth in this year 2025? Are there challenges? What's your take on that sector?
First, before we talk about the challenges, let's look at the prospects.
Right.
The African Union giving kudos to Nigeria in terms of how they have fared in the digital space, particularly in terms of enabling trade in Africa, is welcoming. There are challenges, particularly in terms of intra and inter-African trade. Maybe as we advance the conversation, we're able to speak to certain issues. But in terms of digital revolution, Nigeria has contributed essentially to improving on inter and intra-African trade. To that extent, I think the prospects of larger view compared to the challenges. But then there are a few challenges, and I think as the space open up, those challenges will be addressed. But in terms of policy framework in Nigeria, the digital economy is expanding exponentially, and Nigeria seems to be a greater haven in terms of how the digital transformation can help to improve on trade in Africa.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Sam, for your time in the studio this morning. When you look at the Nigerian economy, you see a very large market with huge population, which should be incentive for investors. We also see that population is also relatively very young, put at 19 years average. Cost of labor is low, as it were. And of course, the current regime also had embarked on a series of reform to really make the business environment really less challenging. What do you think are responsible for the low inflow of FDI into the country?
First and foremost, from a kind of economic indicator perspective, we'll look at some of the index you use to measure an investment-friendly nation. Number one is what we call Business Confidence Index, which look at the confidence of investor to want to put their money in a particular country. So the challenge here over time, political instability, terrorism, kidnapping are some of the factors that has affected in terms of business confidence index in attracting foreign investment on the one hand. On the other hand, you have what you call business sentiment index. What it means is that what kind of sentiment do people have to want to put money or investment in a particular country. So when you look at these various indicators in terms of productivity, in terms of profitability, in terms of inventory, how fast can you take your inventory into the marketplace? What are the consumer disposable income that can make them consume your final product? So these are some of the indicators that has affected to some extent negatively in terms of what comes in. But I think if you look at the ease of doing business index, which is another indicator, I think the government is working very hard to see how they can improve on infrastructure, security, with a view to attracting more investment. But by and large, if you look at the size of the Nigerian economy and the potential, there are a lot of investment that comes in that are not in the public space because the market is there, and you alluded to the large population on the average is about 19 years. So when you look at the cost of labor in terms of what you pay to produce SY commodity, labor is still very cheap. And I think why we may have these challenges, there are a lot of companies, particularly from the Asian world, that has invested so much in Nigeria. But I think as the government is trying to improve on some of these indicators that we just mentioned, and I think the investment portfolio in terms of whether they are capital market portfolio, whether they are direct investment into manufacturing, those elements will improve over time.
Yeah, but recently we also heard that Tony Elumelu speaking in UAE has said that there's no economy that has a higher yield and return than Nigeria as it is, or indeed Africa, as all the growth indicators shows that Africa is actually, should be the bride of investor. And he also alluded to the fact that people also talk about the challenge of security in Nigeria, for example. And he said there are nations that are even more unsecure than Nigeria. Take, for example, the level of killings if you go to South Africa, if you go, for example, to some part of Europe and even in America, that is high level of insecurity beyond sentiment. And here's some other things that we feel we should do better in terms of actually selling ourselves to the world, because profit is here, opportunities are here. Why are people not coming in their droves?
I think from the perspective of international communication or strategic communication, what is key is the media that has the responsibility to set agenda for a country. And I think with the narration we have in the media space, if you do a media scanning analysis, I think the reportage essentially has been more of negative reportage, and that has negative implication for investment. Therefore, going forward, what do we think that will enable Nigeria in particular and Africa is to see how we change this narrative rather than this adversarial reportage that is in the media space. We need to report the opportunities, the prospects. There are always challenges. There's insecurity challenges elsewhere, like you mentioned, particularly South Africa. So Nigeria case is not as negative as that, but when your media projection is essentially about negative reportage, it equally has a negative impact on foreign direct investment. Even local investors may be afraid to move to certain area to put their investment. Therefore, what is key, how do we manage our media posturing for investment opportunity? Two, the government media bulwark must equally change in a way that it doesn't become a reactive media. It should communicate strategically and with a view to positioning the investment opportunity that abound in Nigeria so that we can have more investment portfolio that will stimulate employment. And once there's employment, that will translate to economic prosperity for the people.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, I want to take you to somewhere outside technology and to an area where recently we experienced about $2.7 billion non-oil exports out of Nigeria, and that's agriculture. And people are beginning to wonder, before the advent of crude oil, agriculture used to be the mainstay of our economy. And now, since the discovery of oil, the political elite turned away from it. We are yet to recover from it. What are the business opportunities that are currently available and the organizations that should be pushing for new policy framework and the kind of policy that the government should make for us to, go back to those good old days so that the agenda of diversifying the Nigerian economy can be achieved?
I think for me, what is important is that at the continental level, the African Free Trade Agreement or area has the potential to unleash a lot of development, particularly from agriculture. If you look at the value chain of agriculture, there's so much potential in that sector. And I think the government is making so much investment where you can get item from the farm gate to the marketplace. So agriculture has a lot of potential. We need to invest, and the African Continental Free Trade Agreement or area has a big market of over 1.3 billion people in Africa. And if you look at the trade facilitation agreement, particularly within that, where you can even get your payment in your local currencies, that protect a lot of opportunity to develop that sector. So in terms of potential, agriculture still remains the mainstay of Africa. So we need to put more investment. We need to focus immediate attention and look at the various value chain from the farm gate to the consumer or to the marketplace. To what extent can we grow that sector so that we can create employment for the youth in particular, and like I said earlier, improve on the economic prosperity of the average citizen.
Let's look at the role of the free trade zones in facilitating export. So recently, the managing director of the Nigeria Export Processing Zones Authority, NEBZA, Dr. Olufemi Ogunyemi, in an interview, was talking about how 20 out of the over 50 free trade zones in the country have not been operational, but NEBZA plans to revitalize them. And he talked about how they are not necessarily free trade zones because the operators there still need to pay for certain duties, but we call them like special economic zones. Now, what's the role of these special economic zones in facilitating exports and even attracting investors? Essentially,
Free trade zones are supposed to be stimulant in terms of giving what we call tax haven to manufacturer where they bring their investment. So they go into a free zone where they are exempted from some tariff payment for a period of time so that they can incubate on whatever they are doing. So the idea normally is to stimulate economic growth, stimulate trade in the economy. So I think the government, after creating those zones, have not done sufficient marketing to encourage people to take advantage of those trade zones that will stimulate the economy. So I'm happy that the Export Processing Commission or agency is looking in that direction to stimulate the over 50 trade zones so that they can incubate more businesses. They have some tariff exemption for a period of time. It's not that they won't pay for certain things, but they are exempted to stimulate trade. To that extent, therefore, it's important that government can look inward into stimulating those. Some of them were created in terms of the infrastructure in those zones. They are not up to speed yet, so government should do more investment so that they can attract more people into those zones so that we can stimulate economic growth.
Okay, looking at the level of poverty, because a lot of people also have argued that while we're moving around and shopping for foreign direct investment, but the local companies that are home are not able to do business, and some of them are also folding up on a daily basis, thus creating more unemployment within the system. Now, what role of poverty in the middle of a reform to transition to a prosperous economy?
I think for me, when you use the concept of poverty, I would like to look at it from a multidimensional poverty level where we can consider other indicators. I think essentially one of the major challenges here is what I call the poverty of the mind. because the potentials are there, but everybody wants the white-collar job, want to be in the city, wearing ties, just like the way I'm dressed, and some potentials in the blue economy, blue-collar job are there. But the government must find a way to improve on the window of opportunity where they can move people from poverty. This conditional cash transfer are not really making so much impact. So what I think the investment should be to create space, particularly agriculture, where people can go back to the farm, and that will, to a very large extent, reduce the poverty level, and that can scale up in terms of reducing poverty, as it were. But what is key, once people don't want to expand the scope of their mind in terms of thinking, particularly in terms of opportunity, everybody wants to move to the other side. The concept of trying to migrate to other areas.
Let me put my more flesh into my question. We have seen energy increase, for example. And of course, this also will lead to increase in prices of goods and services. And the buying power, even of those who are doing white-collar job, is also declining. Recently, I think it was during the December-November period, that we even saw people who were selling yam, and for the first time, they were cutting them in pieces because people could not afford the tuber. What exactly do you think is possible to be done so that even with the reforms that are supposed to generate that economic activity, that in the short run is able to sustain the price hike for goods and services?
I think earlier we spoke briefly about ease of doing business. And the challenge here is labor costs, energy costs, infrastructure costs, cost of moving goods from one point to the other has become very expensive. Therefore, for us to improve in terms of providing livelihood, the government must improve on the infrastructure, particularly in terms of energy, where the cost of energy has gone so high, even at the domestic level. I know how much increment in terms of energy consumption at the domestic level in the last 4 months, I think is killing. Not to talk about the private sector. The Manufacturers Association of Nigeria in the last 1 year has been crying the number of people that are packed up in terms of small and medium enterprise that can no longer sustain their business. So we need to improve on the cost of energy. The government needs to make massive investment in terms of how we can bring the cost of energy down. Then two, the disposable income, like you mentioned, can no longer sustain people to the market. Therefore, it has negative impact even in manufacturing. Some are already packing their load to some other places where they think the cost of energy is relatively priced so that they can invest in those areas. So for the government to not just rebasing whatever inflation rate or whatever it's called, is what is the impact on the livelihood of citizens. So the investment must be made in the infrastructure so that once those investments are made, then more companies will be competitive in terms of how they do business so that we can put more people into the net in terms of productivity. And once that translates into profitability, the government will equally earn reasonable taxes, which should translate into more projects for development.
Let's also look at the role of regulation towards enhancing business, ease of doing business in Nigeria, and policies that are being made. What should we be looking at this year to ensure that businesses are not stifled?
Number one, the parameters for doing business, and there's a unit within the presidency that is responsible for ease of doing business. Therefore, cost of registration of businesses, how businesses can repatriate their funds back when they bring direct investment are critical. The multiple taxation has been handled to a very large extent where the Oyedele committee has bridged the gap in terms of the multiple taxation. So once we're able to translate this policy framework into reality, then that will translate into ease of doing business, particularly for manufacturing. And that, again, will translate to a larger dividend of democracy, as it's always called, in a way that it can impact on the citizen.
All right, thank you so much, Samuel Orovwudje, policy and international affairs analyst, here in the studio talking with us about the business climate in Nigeria. You've seen that there are several investment opportunities in Nigeria. And if we talk about the challenges, we could say compared to the rates of return on investment, maybe we could say that's minimal or close to minimal. If you have a continent where the rates of loss is put at 1.17%, as against where you get in another continent 14%, what would you call that? You would say the benefits far more outweigh the challenges. Thank you again for your time with us on the show.
Thank you.